Hi again, everyone. I don't know if you just joined. We've been having some issues with connecting. I'm gonna invite Rachel in here first, and we're gonna talk about. I will be Chinese medicine, 5 elements, and organs. Yay, we connected. Hi, Rachel.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so happy that we connected now.
I know. Sorry about those technical difficulties.
No, it's no worries. These things always happen, and the most important thing is that we connected now. And I'm really excited that we're doing this live together and talking
Ew.
about something that we both love so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and yeah, for those who, if you're watching this after the live and haven't met me, I'm Shireen. I'm studying actually the last year in my traditional Chinese medicine studies, amongst other things that I'm doing, and I'm the creator of Law of Positivism, the Instagram account, and the podcast with the same name, and also my book that will be released in June, The Law of Positivism. So I'm always working with how we can optimize and create more health on all levels in the body. So Chinese medicine has really helped me to understand the body and the emotions and the mind and just life in general so much better. And I just love this modality. And I'm really excited to talk to you today. We're going to talk about the 5 elements. Maybe you want to introduce yourself too, Rachel.
Yeah, of course. My name's Rachel Appel, and I'm an acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist in Boulder, Colorado. I'm the founder of Namaha Welness, which is the name of my private practice in Boulder. And yeah, I also am super passionate about all things Chinese medicine and just so excited to dive into this with you today.
Yeah. And yeah, so excited. And you have more experience than me in this topic. And I'm just taking in so much new information, facts, and ancient wisdom. Actually, it's so much. You can study this your whole lifetime, and it's still not covering everything, probably. But it's so exciting, and we just had. I just had the last week's podcast was about Chinese medicinal herbs. So
Yeah.
that's a branch of Chinese medicine, which I think most people think about acupuncture when they think about Chinese medicine, right? And actually, it's so much more. And maybe you can start sharing, just like from your perspective, how you work with Chinese medicine.
Yeah, of course. So I actually practice a style of Japanese acupuncture called Kodatama Inochi medicine. A lot of the same principles, but I personally work a lot with pulse balancing. That's like my main source of feedback when I'm working with a patient. And so that's kind of what I do in the treatment room. But then my social media is kind of where I really like to dive into concepts that I learned in school. And I just feel like sharing them in that way and that community is a great way for me to continue learning about them and to refresh what those, elemental theories are and what they mean for us. And I just like to try to simplify them as much as possible so people don't feel like bewildered by them, and so that they can actually apply them to their lives.
Yeah, I love what you're doing and what you're sharing because it does simplify. And for me, that studying it, I think it's so great as well.
Yeah,
And we can always learn more and dive deeper into the topic. And I think like most people know like that yin and yang comes from Chinese medicine. So that's like a symbol and but maybe most people don't know what it means. But we can see it as like a duality that's there. There's always has to be a balance. We don't need to have excess or deficiency of anything. We need to like constantly balance, like resting and being active, like not overdoing anything. And then from that foundation we start working with the elements, which what I think is so beautiful, because I'm studying Western medicine too, and I think that this aspect of nature is forgotten in so many traditions now, and that we forget that we can also observe nature to find healing within ourselves. So I would love for us to start talking about the different elements. And what do you want to start with? How, what is like the first element that you want to get into, and or just talk about them all in general first, maybe?
Yeah, I guess just a real quick overview is so the five elements are wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And they are how Chinese medicine has grouped natural phenomena into different sectors to kind of describe our natural world. And so we can use these groups or elements to kind of observe ourselves and our own cycles and rhythms, because we are a reflection of nature, of course. And so, you know, each element has characteristics like a season, a color, an emotion, flavor. The list goes on, and we won't go into all of those things, but just like the main ones that are helpful to know. And I think the other thing to point out is each one of us has an element that we'll relate with the most, that when we hear the characteristics, we'll say, oh, that sounds familiar. And, you know, that kind of describes me as a person, or maybe how my imbalances show out. And so, you know, as we go through these, maybe take note of which one stands out to you, and, you know, maybe a few balancing things that you could do to help when you feel a little bit wacky or off kilter. And then just the last thing I'll mention is, you know, we can work with them individually based on which one we relate to. And then we can also use them seasonally. So each one will be correlated with a season. And so, for example, we're going into spring right now, you know, in the next few weeks. And so everyone should maybe listen closely to this first one, which is the wood element, because we'll all kind of be having more of these things come up for us in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and we can see that in nature when things start growing, and the flourishing of plants, and yeah, this very like fertile and growing energy. And the this element is very connected to the liver and the gallbladder.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you see that? So when we enter this element, what kind of things do we need to think about when it comes to like what we're doing daily and eating? Like, how can we start flowing with that element better?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about the wood element, it is the liver and gallbladder organs, like you said. It's the spring season, and it is associated with the emotion of anger. And so one thing we might feel more of in the next few months, weeks to months, is more anger coming to the surface. And so one recommendation to help balance this element is to really work with your anger. And, you know, maybe that means doing more meditation to kind of process that anger, or journaling about it. Like, what is it that I'm angry about? What sorts of things do I need to work through? But I think also not always seeing anger as a bad thing. Like, anger can also be a catalyst for change, and spring is a big time of change. So I think the other thing would be to just really embrace that feeling of change that's coming.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, just I think that one thing that is really important also with this element, and that can come up a lot, is when we're stressed and we get tense, right? It
Yep.
affects our like muscles and like how if we feel tense in the body. And I think one thing that I'm really enjoying drinking now is because it's good for my constitution. It's like making tea from lemon and
Mhm.
ginger, because it's heating, and then the lemon, if you have stagnation in the body, the energy is not flowing, then that's a good way to get that like chi flowing and everything just flowing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another one of my recommendations for wood element is starting the morning with warm lemon water, um,
Mm.
or kind of sipping it throughout the day. It's just a very gentle thing for the liver to detoxify and strengthen, and move the chi instead.
Yeah, I love that. Such an important organ. And in Chinese medicine, it's also important to have a balance between the emotions. So, like, holding back is not good either, but not like staying either with one emotion and feeling that all the time. Like, then we can really get stuck in that. And I mean, yin yoga positions are great too. I love like twists and getting into like the whole organ area just to massage it from the inside. It's really good to get things flowing in the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the other thing to note is green is the color associated with the wood element. So thinking about really increasing our green foods, like all of our leafy greens and all of our green vegetables, those things are all super cleansing for the liver and for the wood element during, if that is more your constitution all of the time and during spring.
Mm, yeah. I can relate a lot to the wood element actually. I don't know which one you relate to mostly.
Me too.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I can, yeah, really a lot of it is uh, the wood is really an element that also is like the creation power and wanting to do something. Like if you look at the tree, it grows up, wanting to
Yep.
go up. So it's a really fantastic. It's I would say also it's more like an extroverted time when the spring starts. So we can consider that more young and more like outgoing. You start opening up. So yeah. And then after the wood element, what is, so we have like wood element is mother to which element?
Right, so fire element comes next. And the fire element person you can imagine is, very passionate, dramatic, bubbly, like loves talking, loves being social, just very fiery, of course. And it's correlated with the season of summer, which makes sense, the warmest season, correlated with hot weather, and the flavor associated with the fire element is bitter, and then the emotion is joy. And this can be like joyful in a good way, or it can also be overjoyed, kind of more in a manic way. So those are
Yeah.
like the characteristics of that one.
And I think this is so interesting because the like when we see like heart and fire element disorders, we can really see it as, it's so beautiful that we connect the heart with emotions, right?
Yep.
And the heart is where our shen or the mind or consciousness or soul is anchored, and it should be anchored there. And if it's not, then we have these like emotional like imbalances, and we feel like we can have like really intense dreams and things like this. Then we know it's like connected to the heart. And even you can see it on the tongue, like on the tip of the tongue if it's red. And I see this so much in my clinical internship now, that when I working with psychiatry patients that have like these emotional imbalances, you can see also the redness that comes out, because the red color, like when it comes to the skin, it can be some heat, it can be connected to the heart, it can be connected to a lot of things. But I think that we in society, we think that we should always be happy, and when we're not happy, then something is wrong. But in truth, we need to feel all emotions. It's part of life, but again, not being like stuck in an emotion, because then we get stagnated.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and I think, some other things to point out when the fire element is imbalanced, we can see insomnia is really common, and
Yeah.
circulatory issues. Um, a lot of forgetfulness can happen. Excuse me. That's, I think, a big one, is kind of just being a little bit all over the place and
Mm.
forgetful. So if you're feeling those things, then you could potentially be more of a fire element.
Yeah. And also, I'm thinking that the heart is connected to the womb, and that's really important too, to have this connection and not lose it and be in touch with your body. I think grounding can be important for this. If you start getting like you're overly like in these emotional and insomnia, all of this, it affects us emotionally and then physically. So
Right.
it's really important to balance that, and good sleep is so important for everything in the body. So
Yeah,
yeah, the summertime is really heart time. I think about also like in July and August we have like Leo time, and that's also connected to the heart. So it's really interesting to see the connections between everything.
definitely. Yeah. And, it's kind of the same as Pitta in Ayurveda. They all have
Mm,
connections. I love seeing like the cross reference between all of the different systems.
yeah. And what type of, so the heart is, the taste is bitter,
Hmm.
and I've seen that in my case that I'm kind of not, I don't like bitter. I don't like coffee, and I feel like overly stimulated by coffee. So that means that there is some fire going on there. So we can
Right.
think about this like bitter can balance the heart, but it can also create fire in the heart. So it
Yeah.
needs to be really balanced. And if we feel like the opposite of what we're describing, then maybe we need to like have some bitter herbs or bitter foods. I don't know what bitter foods are good for the heart.
Yeah. I think you're so right. Like, anytime we prescribe something in Chinese medicine, it always has to be in moderation, right? Because
Yeah,
too much of a good thing can also create imbalance.
yeah.
But yeah, balancing things for the heart element are definitely bitter foods in moderation, red foods, um, also just cooling foods in general, and kind of
Mm,
avoiding spicy and hot foods that can really aggravate the fire element.
yeah.
If you tend to, be more red in your complexion, have night sweats, get hot really easily. Um, yeah. And then I'd say another thing outside of food that can be really helpful for the fire element is making sure they have time for solitude, and like time for some planning and just kind of gathering their thoughts, because their tendency is to be so outward and so social. I think it really helps to balance that fire when, they bring in a few more qualities of maybe the earth or the water element that's more internal, and likes tranquility, and yeah, just thinking of kind of balancing with the opposite.
Mm, yeah, I agree. And then the fire element goes on to, is it the metal element now?
It's the earth next.
The earth, yeah.
Yes.
That's like midsummer. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's like in the center, exactly. So
Yeah.
how would you describe this element?
Yeah, so this one, the season, you're right, is correlated with kind of that late summer in August, early September. It is when you think of the element person, you think of like the nurturing mother. You know, they can be just very giving and grounded, loyal, empathetic. That's kind of, they have this very sweet nature, and the flavor is sweet. That's correlated with this element. And let's see what else. The color is yellow. And yeah, the sound is kind of like this singing sound. Like the voice is usually
Mm.
very singing and nice to listen to. Um, yeah, so that's the earth element person, and we feel more of these things in around the August, September time.
Mm. Yeah, and here the spleen and stomach is the key. And it's so, I think it's so interesting that this element is affected of how we think, and if we are dwelling on something or worrying, you know, you can really affect, if you're worrying, having anxiety, you can feel it in your stomach, like you
Hmm.
can, your digestion gets weaker. And I think what I've seen, like so far in my studies, is that the spleen, like, I don't know if it's the way we've been eating in society and like the stress we have and all of this. There's a lot of like spleen chi deficiency, and that is like where all like chi is like produced mostly, and it comes from how we digest our food and the drinks and everything, and it works with all the other elements and all the other organs. So it's so important. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think this one we see a lot, like there's a lot of issues with this.
Yeah, I would say the two that I see the most in my practice are wood element imbalance and
Mm.
element imbalance. And the wood element is very, I mean, they're all interconnected, but you know, we have the thing called liver overacting on spleen, which is super common
Yeah.
because stress is kind of related to the liver, and this stress overacts on the spleen, which is our digestion. And so, you know, we see like IBS and bloating and so many digestive issues that are caused by stress these days. And that's kind of the modern way to think about what liver overacting on spleen is. Um, and yeah, I think, you know, when the earth element is out of balance, there is a tendency to be chronic worriers and, you know, maybe feel more needy and kind of just like overextending yourself, giving too much, like not really knowing where your boundaries are.
Mm.
And then also the digestive issues, like we mentioned. And then lastly, sugar cravings can be a big one for earth element imbalances.
Mm. Yeah, and I think most people can relate to that.
Yeah,
And in moderation it's good, but
yeah,
it's again, if you have like a slow and tired spleen, then you will want to have sweets
yeah,
to compensate for that, and that's not really good for anything.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and the next element that comes after, uh, that will be the fall now.
yep. Um, so that is the metal element, and it's correlated with the lung and large intestine organs. And it's, yep, the fall season. It's correlated with the color white, and the flavor is pungent, which is kind of like spicy, kind of like a horseradish flavoring. Um, and then the emotion is grief or sadness,
Mm.
and the weather associated with it is dryness. So all of these things can flare up in a person that is a metal element as well as during the fall season.
Yeah, and one interesting thing, we learned that lung is connected to sadness and sorrow, and at the same time the lung is connected to our immune system. So again, like what happens if we're chronically sad? We start to weaken our immune system.
Yeah,
And one interesting thing when I was reading pathology was that uh, it said in my medical book that people with asthma and these lung diseases, that they, or it was maybe in particular asthma, that they are more prone to depression. And so
Hmm.
this is really like Western medicine talking about the same thing as Eastern medicine does. So it's
Yes.
really important to strengthen. And I think like in yoga, we practice a lot of breathing techniques that strengthen the lung. You feel more invigorated. And the lung is also important for our life force, energy, everything. And it's our connection with the outside world in a way.
Yeah, and you can think of the metal element person as someone who's very dedicated, kind of independent, intellectual, very detail oriented, structured, and brave. Like, just if you think of like a knight in shining armor, it's kind of like that feeling. And then when they're out of balance, or if there's imbalances during the fall, like you were saying, there can be asthma and respiratory issues. They can be overly critical on themselves as well as other people. And there can be a lot of grief and sadness that hasn't been dealt with. And there can also be skin issues like psoriasis and eczema because the metal element is related to the skin.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and allergies too.
Yeah, allergies, absolutely.
Mm. And then also again, like the spleen is connected, also working together with the lungs. So like having a good spleen and stomach digestion is also helping us with the whole like allergy things that are going on.
Yeah,
Because the lung is also connected to the skin, like yeah, we see that directly,
right.
the skin.
Yeah, and so things to do to balance the metal element would be, like you said, regular breath work, breathing exercise to really strengthen the lungs. Also focusing on eating small amounts of pungent foods and white foods, so like horseradish, mushrooms, cauliflower. And what else? I think, most importantly, it's always good to focus on whatever the emotion is for the element, is really doing work around that emotion. So
Mm.
for earth element, it's worry. So really, setting good boundaries and dealing with your worry, trying to stay present so you're not focusing in the future. And
Mm.
metal would be grief and sadness. So, maybe finding some talk therapy to move through old grief, sadness, again, journaling about that emotion and how that shows up for you. But yeah, I'd say probably the number one recommendation for each of the element would be to really dive into the emotion and to work with that to find.
Mm. Yeah, and seeing what pattern of emotions you have, because then you
Right.
can know also which it's so if you're constantly feeling a certain way, then you know, okay, this is the, so it's really easy to figure it out yourself, and then you need to like know what steps to take to balance that organ and that emotion.
Right, because in Chinese medicine, we learn that the seven emotions are really one of the foundations for all disease in the body. And so, if we can start there, a lot of the time we can prevent symptoms and imbalances in the body from showing up later. Uh,
Mm.
so, I think, working with both is really important.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And then we have the water element, which is more like the winter, right?
Yeah, so water element is the last of the five elements. It is associated with the kidney and bladder organs, the winter season. So that is what we technically are in still here, even though, we're having some warmer days. We are still in winter, and it's associated with the salty flavor, the color black, and then the emotion of fear
Mm.
and cold weather because, winter time.
Yeah. And
Yep.
it's really the kidneys are like the where we store our like essence, and the import, this is so important for our health and how we age and reproduction, all of this. And I think like if you're like constantly cold or feeling like cold in the body or in the abdomen, or like just try to And I think a lot of women feel that, like, always keep your feet warm.
Mm-hmm.
If you have like a warming, like these, I
Heat pad,
think it's, sorry.
the heating pad.
Yeah, heating
Yeah.
pad. It's so good to have like on your legs or feet or stomach even, to keep warm. And I think one of the things that I've learned so much in Chinese medicine is that, like, what the thought of what good food is, it's really depends on your body. And I've always been a cold person, but then for a while I was eating a lot of raw food and cold foods, and my body was not reacting well with that. I just got colder and colder. So then I started with warming foods and soups and things like this, like more nourishing, a little bit more like heavier food. It really worked for my body. So giving, like, generally it's not recommended to have like cold drinks and foods, because it can really like disturb the digestions. And I'm thinking about the kidneys, that it can be the tendency is like yang deficiency
Yeah.
or qi deficiency. So it's really important to like help the body to have this fire, like the agni that we talk about also.
Right, yeah. And so the water person is, I like to envision a river moving downstream. Like it's very determined. It knows where it's going, but it's going in a very, beautiful, flowing way where it's a little bit different from the wood element, where the wood element is also determined, but kind of in more of an aggressive way. The
Yeah.
water is very fluid and soft and gentle. Um, and they can be, like I mentioned earlier, they really enjoy solitude and like to be alone. And if you think about,
Mm.
winter is all about solitude and alone time and kind of going within. And so, of course, the water element person would be that way as well.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
And yeah, and so their imbalances, since it is related to kidney and bladder, they can have urinary problems, low back pain, because that's kind of where the kidneys are located. They can have hearing issues, and like you said, have a lot of coldness in the body, a lot of fatigue. Um, and also, just bringing up the emotion, having a lot of fear. And it's different than worry, because worry is, rumination, whereas fear is legitimate fear of something. And so it's interesting, a water element person can either be this very timid, quiet, fearful person, or they can be like an adrenaline junkie,
Mm.
which is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
but they love that adrenaline rush, that like kidney rush. And so it's interesting how in each element there can be so many variations of that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be like extreme opposites
Right.
actually. It
Mm-hmm.
can be so extreme. And when we have an imbalance for a long time, that's when it becomes like, if it becomes chronic, it gets like worse and worse. But if we find the imbalance, like listen to the body, listen to ourselves, feeling our emotions, then we can like prevent it to become a chronic issue as well. So it's
Yeah.
good to work like to just go to the root and to see where it's coming from, because we can't just treat like symptoms all the time. We have to go to the root. And sometimes I think that when we're working with cases and patients, it's really, you have to investigate very far back to see where the imbalance started. It might not be exactly when you think it started. It can be so further back.
Totally. Yeah. These things definitely start way ahead of when we think they do.
Definitely.
Yeah,
And yeah, and you had some, did you have a meditation or a breathing exercise that you wanted to share as well?
I did. Real quick though, just to go over a few things to balance the
Yeah,
water element.
yeah,
So
sure.
I think, making sure we're drinking plenty of fluids, just with kidney and water regulation, limiting the adrenaline rush activities, And like you said, keeping the feet warm. Massages can be really helpful for this element to deal with lymph and excess fluid in the body. And then lastly, of course, dealing with the fear element and really diving into that and where you're afraid of things and why, and kind of, yeah, just contemplating that more.
Mm. And one thing that my teacher said is that also, like when you're craving salt,
Mm,
it can be a sign that you have to work with the kidneys because it needs to strengthen up.
yes, totally. That is definitely a thing. And again, like we were saying, a little bit of salt and a little bit of salt can be really healing for the kidneys, but too much can be detrimental.
Mm.
And then, yeah, lastly, also focusing on eating more of like the black and darker foods. So
Mm.
black beans and, black grapes and miso and seaweed, those kinds of things.
Yeah, black sesame seeds
Oh,
are really good too.
so good.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast where you mentioned you had the tahini black sesame.
Yeah,
That
it's
sounds so
so
good.
good. It's so good. I just ate it. I try to get it. I'm working also a lot with the kidneys, so
Okay.
yeah, just strengthening that and also working with the liver. So yeah, I think it's so fascinating. I love this topic and it's so much to learn. And I love to help others also with this when I'm like done with my studies. So
Yeah.
what was your insights when it came to breathing or meditation exercises?
Right. So, yeah, I just wanted to end today with a 5 element breathing exercise that's super simple. And you can do it in cycles of 3, 6, or 9 times.
Mm.
Do it in a cycle of 3 today. But basically, what we'll do is we'll bring our hands to each organ, the area where the organ is, and we'll just take a deep breath into that space and think of the color associated with that organ and send it like this healing that's colored. For example, the liver is green. So we'll take a deep inhale, and on the exhale, we'll send the liver some nice healing green energy. And then we'll move to the heart, and then the spleen, lungs, and then the kidneys. And I'll kind of guide you where those are as we move through each 5 element.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Yes,
Awesome.
let's do it.
All right, so let's close our eyes and take just a few deep breaths to get grounded. Inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. And one more time, inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. So keeping the eyes closed, we'll start with the liver element and bring both of your hands to right under your right rib cage. And we'll just give it some nice healing energy. Inhale through the nose. And on the exhale, send green healing light to your liver. Another deep inhale. And exhale, sending green healing light to the liver. And one more time, inhale. And exhale. So then moving to the heart, we'll place our hands over our heart area. And this time on the exhale, we'll envision a red healing light filling up our heart area. So inhale through the nose. And exhale, sending red healing energy to the heart. Inhale through the nose. And exhale. And one more time, inhale through your nose. And exhale, send that red healing light to your heart. Now moving to the spleen area, which is underneath your left rib cage, so opposite your liver. And this organ is the yellow healing light. So on our inhale through the nose, exhale, send yellow healing light to the spleen. Inhale through your nose. And exhale, sending yellow light to the spleen. Last time on your own. Okay, now we'll bring our hands to our upper chest area to make a connection with the lung organ. And for this one, we'll envision the lungs filling with white healing light on our inhale, and then exhale, sending that energy to our lungs. So inhale and exhale, sending white healing energy to the lungs. Inhale and exhale. And last time, inhale, fill your lungs with white healing light. And exhale. So our last element is the kidneys. So we'll bring our hands to our lower back, make a connection with the kidney organs there. And this color is black. So on the inhale, imagine your kidneys filling with black healing energy. And on the exhale, continue to send that energy there. Inhale. And exhale. And last time, inhaling through the nose. And exhale, sending black healing light to the kidneys. Now bring your palms to your lap, keeping the eyes closed, and just take a few moments of silence. Feel how you've shifted after practicing this short breathing exercise. All right, now we can open our eyes.
Thank you. That
You
was a great breathing meditation. I love that. I'm gonna do more of that.
Yeah, so that one is, like I said, the 3 cycles of breath, but we can do 6 times with each organ or 9 times,
Yeah,
how much time you have.
fantastic. I love that. And when we visualize, we are seeing something on a different vibration. So it does shift our body and our cells. So I think it was a great exercise. And I'm really glad that we connected here, and we will also do a podcast together to dive deeper into like spring and wood season, and how to work with that deeper, because it's coming up in a few weeks, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, anything more you want to share before we end the call?
I guess I'll just end by saying, understanding these elements, just it's better to see it as, we're each this unique expression, and none of these things are bad or good. It's just really, information. And when we have information and knowledge, like that's what removes fear, right? Because we just have more understanding. And so, the more we can understand these concepts and kind of flow with them, the more frictionless and easeful our life will be. And so, there's so much information about the five elements online and in books. So if you want to dive deeper into these concepts, feel free to reach out to either of us to kind of maybe get some references of where to explore more.
Yeah, definitely connect with us, and we will have a podcast coming out, and podcast episode. I have a couple of podcast episodes on the Law of Positivism podcast about Chinese medicine as well, from different point of views and practitioners. So if you want to learn more, you can read there as well. So thank you so much to everyone who's connected today. We're so happy, and yeah, see you soon again.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.